Welcome to the Commitments Hub Report launch webinar, which is a reprise of the webinar that we did to launch the report earlier this month. So thanks for joining us today. I'd just like to start off by doing a shout out for our recent Plant Trees Save Coffee consumer-facing campaign, which we launched on Coffee Days this year in September, so September 29th and October 1st for National and International Coffee Day. We launched this campaign to Plant Trees Save Coffee, which was a campaign between the industry and also coffee consumers. And just wanted to highlight here that Jacobs Douwe Egberts was a lead partner in the campaign alongside additional contributors, CET Power, Nespresso, Keurig Dr. Pepper, Ned Coffee, and Mercon. So thanks so much to everybody for your support. And if you're a coffee drinker or interested in the campaign, getting a little feedback. Please click the link or go to sustaincoffee.org/coffeedays, and more information to come on that and a report out in the coming months in 2020. The agenda for today is that we will give some general updates and announce new partners. We'll go through the major findings of the Commitments Hub report, touch on the sustainability framework, give some news about the collective action networks, and then announce spring events and the all partner meeting. So 2019 was a really big year here at the Challenge. We're celebrating 140 partners as of this month, and 27 new partners. 56 partners have commitments. There are 91 total commitments in the hub. There are more than 650 newsletter subscribers, and we had a 109% increase in website views at sustaincoffee.org. So great to know that people are going online and learning about the challenge. So this is a slide animation of many of our partners. We're still adding more and more every day. So excited that we can no longer fit on one screen without an animation. So 140 partners strong. These are some of the newest challenge partners: Riley Foods, Red Start Roasters, Streamliners Espresso Bar, Arbor Day Coffee, Eco Grounds Coffee, Eco Business Fund, National Coffee Association, Farm Trace, Hellenic, and In Veritas. We also have new commitments from Riley Foods, Red Start Roasters, Arbor Day Coffee, Kroger, 2 commitments from Eco Grounds Coffee, Sakura-san and SNB have also made commitments, so thanks. Just a note here that commitments are really, really important for driving transparency and sparking collective action and sparking more ambitious commitments in the sector. So to move into our Commitments Hub journey, in 2016, we launched the Commitments Hub, and in December or late 2017, we opened the reporting process for the first time. In 2018, we refreshed the platform, so the platform side, not the front website of the hub, but the platform side of the hub was refreshed, and we moved to the provider Gadara. In 2019, at the end, so June 30th, that was the deadline for inclusion in this first annual Commitments Hub report. So any commitments made after that were just showcased on previous slides. And so the deadline for the next report will be by end of June 2020, and we'll be sure to remind you all of that as well to be included in future analysis. So without further ado, if you will, I will move on to the Commitments Hub report analysis. So you're just seeing a screenshot of sort of the front page of the report here and a couple of the secondary pages to follow. But we're just so excited to launch this report with you today. mostly because the question that we continue to ask ourselves here at the challenge is really, are we getting closer to our vision of making coffee the world's first sustainable agricultural product? And so, as you just heard, for the past 2 years, partners have been publicly stating their commitments and also reporting progress. But this report is really the first ever analysis of the hub and of the commitments and of the reporting information that we've done. So it helps us look at our collective investment and progress in addressing major key issues. So we really want all actors to make, state, and report their commitments, and then on our side, we will continue evolving the hub over time. So to dive right into the report, this is the snapshot that we're seeing as of the time that we wrote the hub document. So on the screen, you can see that 51% of commitments were made by retailers and roasters. 52% of commitments had a global focus. 35% of commitments related to sourcing policies. 55% of commitments will reach maturity by next year. And 54% of commitments tagged SDG 12, responsible consumption and production. So this is a list of partners with public commitments in the hub at the time of the report. So just want to celebrate the names that you can see on the screen here and encourage you to be added to this list by stating your commitment in 2020. As of the time of this report, a total of 55 stakeholders entered 83 commitments in the hub. And we saw that private sector actors were responsible for 66% of commitments in the hub, with retailers and roasters at a 51% majority. And we really think that this is representative of the demand side focus of the Sustainable Coffee Challenge. And want to note that only 4 of the 10 roasters in the 2018 Coffee Barometer have publicly stated commitments in the hub. So this shows that there's a greater need for participation from them. You can also see in the wheel that 13% of commitments were made by civil society, and producer country governments and producer organizations make up 10% of commitments. To date, 27 stakeholders are or have invested $531 million towards achieving 33 commitments, and we saw that those 27 stakeholders were mostly roasters and nonprofits. 380 million of that is dedicated to global actions without a specified country, and then 151 million was dedicated to specific countries. So while 531 million is significant, it spans multiple years and does not necessarily represent an increase in total annual investments since the publication of the sustainability catalog. And in the sustainability catalog, they estimated a total annual investment of 350 million in sustainability programs in 2016 alone. So based on the responses, roasters and nonprofits were making the largest investments, and those willing to publicly state their investment were most likely committing to sustaining supply at 37%. Strengthening demand was at 23% of investment, conserving nature was at 21%, and improving livelihoods was at 19%. 52% of commitments were global, and most were made by roasters and retailers. And more than 50% of those commitments committed to sustainable sourcing and purchasing certified or verified coffee. Commitments support 30 countries, mostly in Latin America. So we noted that nearly half of the 83 commitments, or 42%, targeted a specific producing country, and in some cases more than one producing country. And actors were most likely to target sustainability programs in Latin America, followed by Africa. They were least likely to note programs in Asia. The top 8 countries in terms of number of commitments can be found on the map on the screen. So you can see Colombia has 9, Guatemala 9, Honduras 7, Nicaragua 7, Mexico 6, Brazil 4, Ethiopia 4, and Peru 4. We also found that most country-focused commitments were in Latin America, and as I just mentioned, were in Colombia, Guatemala, Honduras, and Nicaragua, which, as you know, currently form 18% of global coffee production. So most commitments from these 4 countries tackle climate change and technical assistance, with nearly a quarter of the commitments tracking progress by counting the number of trees planted as their metric. We also discovered that more than half of existing commitments should be achieved by 2020. So 14 commitments have already reached their target year. You can see 2017 and 2018, and 10 commitments should be reached at the end of this year, 2019, and 31 in 2020. So the circle on the screen of the coffee cups here means that over half of existing commitments should be achieved by end of next year. Here's the 55%. So looking at 2020 and to 2025 and beyond, we found that 11 commitments are for 2025 and beyond, and those tend to be commitments made by roasters or nonprofits. And they focus on sourcing policies, that's 45% of those commitments, climate change, 27% of those commitments, and renovation also at 27%. 64% of those commitments focused on strengthening partnerships, UN SDG 17. And 5 of 8 stakeholders making beyond 2020 commitments stated their level of investment, totaling just 27 million. And that's just 5% of total funding that we found committed in the hub. Though reporting opened in December of 2017, only 18% of stakeholders with commitments have reported progress, yet retailers and roasters are paving the way as industry leaders, and you can see them here. And those retailers and roasters have reported against 15 commitments in total. So just to celebrate those industry leaders, you can see the list is on the screen, but it includes Arizona State University, Ethico, Mi Cafeto, NCBA Clusa, Nescafe, Nespresso, the Sustainability Consortium, Rainforest Alliance, Starbucks, and Sumerian Coffee. So this 18% suggests the need to further encourage reporting on commitments through more regular outreach coming from the Sustainable Coffee Challenge. So that's something that we've noted as a to-do in the future. And most commitments with reported progress targeted sourcing policies and more global, just to share that as well. And you'll see 11 of these commitments have a 2020 maturity date. Almost half of them were at 50% progress or more, which you can see with the amount of liquid in the coffee cups. But there are 20 additional commitments, as you saw previously with a 2020 deadline, that have not reported any progress. So that makes it really difficult to ascertain whether they'll reach their goals by next year. So just to reiterate that we really encourage reporting and feel that reporting progress is absolutely crucial, not only moving into the decade of irreversible climate impact decisions, but just for the spirit of transparency and trust, and for partners to learn from one another and understand who is doing what. And then we can shine a light on opportunities for collaboration and to scale programs for a bigger impact. The Challenges Sustainability Framework has at its core a guiding compass, which you'll see now on the screen. And that drives action in 4 impact areas: sustain supply, strengthen market demand, conserve nature, and improve livelihoods. Most commitments in the hub, or 64%, contributed to multiple impact areas, and that's why the 4 percentages on the screen do not add up to 100, because the commitments are laddering up to multiple impact areas. So you can see here that over half of commitments, or 58%, focus on ensuring a future supply of coffee through technical assistance and other investments. Across the other 3 compass points in the commitments, across the other 3 compass points, the commitments were evenly focused. Although 37% targeted improved livelihoods, and we note that this trend will be interesting to watch in future reports given the current focus on farmer profitability and living income. Turning to the sustainability framework, the framework identifies 15 intervention pathways that stakeholders invest in to address key issues in the coffee value chain. So you can see here that most commitments focus on sourcing, technical assistance, and climate change. Government policies for consuming and producing countries had the least, and 1 commitment did not tag categories. And note again here that the percentages will not add up to 100. Many commitments selected more than 1 intervention. The overall largest proportion of commitments in the hub, or 35%, were dedicated to sourcing policies. And these were made mostly by roasters as part of their global sourcing strategies. So over a third, or 38%, of these sourcing commitments also tagged standards and certifications as applying to their commitment. The labor intervention that you can see in blue made up 24% of commitments in the improved livelihoods compass area, but child and forced labor continue to show up in the headlines, which suggests the sector has more work to do to address labor concerns. Commitments to forest conservation and restoration represented 20% of commitments in the hub, and 13 stakeholders, mostly retailers and roasters, made these commitments. And you can see that in the green on the right-hand side. Only 1 actor had a commitment that explicitly referred to deforestation. So for the coffee sector, that will be, we need to explore that further. There was also 1 commitment tagged to consuming country policy, although we know that many governments have sustainable procurement policies for their agencies, and only 3 commitments focused on producer country policy. So this suggests that the challenge needs to do more targeted outreach to government agencies, which we will do in the months to come. Just finally, 10% of commitments tagged other, and in looking at those, we discovered a focus on research and 1 commitment on renewable energy. In terms of SDGs, we also analyzed the commitments by UN SDGs, and we found the following chart, percentages on your screen as well. So commitments contributing to responsible consumption and production, zero hunger, and decent work and economic growth. Those were the most popular SDGs that we discovered. And you can also see that actors selected did not assign SDGs or selected not applicable for 6%. So looking at the top SDGs by stakeholder or actor revealed that roasters and retailers had commitments aligned with responsible consumption and production, or SDG 12, and decent work and economic growth, SDG 8. So those 2. And then retailers and nonprofits or institutions, followed closely by roasters, aligned with zero hunger targets, and that's SDG 2. Data in the hub helps identify existing relationships and networks in key countries and on critical issues. So stakeholders who state commitments can note their partners, and then using this information, we try to start to piece together the way in which stakeholders interact or could serve as keystones in building synergies across initiatives, etc. So with that being said, this report notes that 52% of commitments listed a partner, and 39% of commitments stated more than one partner that they were making the commitment with. So in Colombia, we were able to see a convergence of commitments targeting the departments of Cauca or Caldas, partnering with the local government, university, or various cooperatives of coffee farmers to meet their goals. But in Guatemala, Honduras, and Nicaragua, however, we were not able to note any synergies emerging, as most stakeholders listed only nondescript partners and using words such as roasters, cooperatives, customers, suppliers, or quote, public partners. So moving forward, we will encourage the use of specific partner names for hub commitments, and we'll also encourage discussion and collaboration among stakeholders targeting similar geographies. So lastly, we found that commitments show potential to align on metrics. So you can see here the chart on the screen that while we noted that the private sector led the way in terms of commitments stated, they did not necessarily lead the way with percentage of those commitments with metrics, as you can see on the table here. So though retailers and roasters represented the majority of stakeholders and the majority of commitments, every commitment made by government agencies, producers, co-ops, exporters, traders, and multi-stakeholder initiatives or associations at the bottom of this table reported metrics with their commitments. So just to pause here for a second, where stakeholders did list specific metrics they would use to report, we analyzed them to begin identifying areas where there is already a high level of alignment on indicators and those requiring more time to get to consensus. So all in all, looking at the metrics, we digested 5 of the most common interventions, and the remainder of interventions only had a small number of commitments or had a few stated indicators. So that precluded them from this analysis. And in the following slides, we assessed alignment on a scale of low, medium, and high alignment based on number of cases where a proposed metric overlapped with a metric proposed by another commitment. So how much overlap was there or not? So just to start off with strengthened market demand, in that compass point, we looked at sustainable sourcing and standards and certifications commitments. So that's 29 commitments, and 20 of those 29 had metrics. 78% of stakeholders listed at least one metric that they would use to track their progress. So you can see on the screen, 25% of commitments use the metric percentage or percent of certified, verified, or sustainable sourcing. 14% used pounds sourced via sustainability programs. 7% used number of products sustainably sourced. And we also just want to add here that over a third, or 38% of sourcing commitments, also tagged standard certifications as their intervention, and we figured that this meant that they would use their programs to meet their targets. So that's just a side note there. And ultimately, we categorized these commitments as having medium level of alignment. Of the 25 technical assistance commitments, 22 listed metrics, and 91% of stakeholders listed at least one. Yet we classified this group as having a very low level of alignment on metrics. Of the most common metrics noted, 20% of technical assistance commitments listed trees and number of people trained. That could be agents trained, number of farmers trained, number of smallholders trained, or number of trainers trained. And then we also had 8% of the commitments looking at hectares. So there's work needed to improve the technical assistance metrics and nudge actors to note more details when stating metrics. So from moving from hectares to, for example, hectares under improved management. We also looked at renovation in sustained supply, so sustained supply had 2. But all actors stating renovation commitments listed metrics, with the most popular metrics focusing on number of trees or varieties distributed, and number of hectares impacted at 18%. So you can see the other percentages on the screen. We still classified these commitments as having a low level of alignment on metrics, but we expect the number of R&R metrics used only once to change in the future, as that the R&R network in the Sustainable Coffee Challenge has decided on 4 common metrics. And so that's where we list new metrics on the right side of the screen that they will use to report progress. So adopting these metrics that they decided upon will help the challenge track progress towards the collective target that the group has of sustainably renovating and rehabilitating 1 billion trees by 2025. Moving to conserve nature, the vast majority of stakeholders, or 83%, sorry, that should say 83%, not 84, 83% of stakeholders listed at least one metric that they would use. And 77% of commitments had metrics only listed once. So this is also a very low level of alignment on metrics here. The most common metric across the 34 commitments that we looked at in this category focused on trees or number of trees, used for 15% of conserved nature commitments, hectares at 12% of commitments, and number of trees planted at 6% of commitments. Stakeholders were also likely to track number of people trained, but some looked at farmers, some looked at total number of people, some looked at youth. But if we aggregate the word training, however, in the metrics, that accounts for 15% of conserved nature commitments. So the two text boxes that you see on the right side are indicating that within the 15 conserved nature commitments tagged with water conservation, number of farmers trained made up 20% of water commitments. And within the 15 conserved nature commitments tagged with forest conservation and restoration, number of farmers trained made up 12% of these commitments. And then finally, we saw a tremendous need for alignment on labor metrics. So we looked at 20 labor commitments, and 14 of those have metrics. And the majority of stakeholders, or 88%, stated them, but most were used by just one actor, so very low level of synergy. And 30% of stakeholders listed no metrics or non-applicable. For those labor commitments where metrics were available, there wasn't a single case of overlap in the metrics. So when I first presented this draft report at the All Partner meeting in the spring of this year, I was asked for some example labor metrics, and so you can see some of those in the box on the screen: number of livelihoods, number of children, number of farmers, and number of workers. But all in all, there is much work still needed to align actors on livelihoods commitments, especially commitments focused on labor, gender, youth and indigenous peoples, and education and health. And in some cases, work has already been done to suggest common metrics, but these have not yet been adopted or mainstreamed by the sector. So where they do exist, the hub and the challenge will suggest their uptake. So it will be important to encourage stakeholders to list metrics for all commitments included in the hub and to work together to further align efforts in monitoring and measuring their progress. And the challenge will leverage our collective action networks and partners to identify similar common metrics to further alignment and enable reporting across the sector. So just to end with our little infographic of the report, major findings. To recap, as of June 2019, 55 stakeholders have stated 83 commitments to sustainability in the hub. More than half of the commitments came from roasters and retailers, or 51%. Half of the commitments target 2020 for their completion, so next year, although some stakeholders have already begun implementing longer-term programs. Most stakeholders continue to work on an individual project mentality with few co-investments across peer companies and or organizations. Commitments are targeting 30 countries. 10 stakeholders have reported on their commitments. 27 stakeholders have pledged $531 million towards achieving 33 commitments. Roasters and retailers are the most likely to state and report on commitments within the hub. And most of commitments focused on sourcing policies, technical assistance, and climate change. Roasters and retailers are the most likely to state and report on commitments within the hub. And there is much more work needed to align on common metrics, especially those on social issues. So this inaugural Commitments Hub report is really a first step at showing the level of commitment, investment, and progress towards sustainability in the coffee sector. And we know that the hub does not represent the entirety of the sector's commitment to an investment in sustainability. It begins to identify emerging patterns and insights, and we just hope that the hub can serve as a resource for the sector as it tracks its sustainability progress. So thanks so much, and please click the link to download the report. If you're not able to click, you can just go to sustaincoffee.org/resources, and it will be there in the top sort of rotating bar. And please reach out to us at scc@conservation.org if you have questions about the analysis or the report, and we'd be happy to get back to you in a timely fashion. So we look forward to seeing all of your new commitments in the hub in 2020. And now just quickly to highlight the fact that the sustainability framework is there for you to really help you get started. And so new partners on the webinar, I just want to let you know that the sustainability framework is really what we like to think of as a simplified map of the complex world of coffee sustainability. So it can help guide companies, governments, civil society, and others in their individual and collective action. So please reach out to us if you want to look at the framework, but it is going to soon have a new beautified brochure that is being designed by our designers at the moment and is coming extremely soon. So we will be mailing that out to partners as soon as it is fresh and live. And we hope that you can take a look at it and get some insights and maybe reconsider some of your commitments and future ambitious goals by being inspired by this document. So please forge your commitments and pathways with the framework. And I think Bambi was maybe having some technical difficulties, but are you there, Bambi?
Thanks, Valerie.
Hey, thanks. Sorry. Thanks so much.
It's okay. No, thanks for that. So what we wanted to do with the rest of the time today was just give an update on where we are with the various collective action networks. So you can go to the next slide. So just as a refresher, we do have these 4 collective action networks, and they meet usually once a month via teleconference, and usually 1 or 2 in-person meetings per year. And these were selected by the partners themselves. So in terms of which issues we wanted to focus in on and try to advance on together. And so there's one on scaling up sustainable sourcing that's facilitated by Fair Trade USA. There's one on farm renovation rehabilitation that's facilitated by Raina on our team here at Conservation International. Improved labor practices and supply that is facilitated by Rainforest Alliance. And then the final one on mapping and monitoring coffee and forests that I facilitate. Next one. So these all are working through a process of really trying to find information and tools that everyone can use today to take a step into this particular issue, trying to make sure that those are easy to access and understandable. So we've done a lot of pocket guides, things like that, that try to walk people through different stages of decision making. And then we've done a lot of case studies that show how these tools and resources are being applied by your peers within the sector. So those have all been done over the course of the last 1.5 years of the action networks actually meeting and advancing on those pieces. And where all of them are today is really working together to try and fill some information gaps and make these tools and processes better, and also trying to incentivize more action. So doing these programs more and doing them more efficiently and really trying to scale them up. So that's through new research, new proposals, new investment funds, collaborative projects. And so a lot of the work today is more focused on that, as well as on some of the work that Valerie mentioned related back to the Commitments Hub and the framework in terms of trying to make sure that we are further aligned on metrics on these particular issues than we seem to be based on what we've seen in the Commitments Hub. So as I mentioned, we have a lot of outputs that we have created today to try and help the partners and others in the sector understand what the issues are, what the opportunities are, and what resources are available to you to advance on these strategies. So for renovation, we have a pocket guide, we have a guidebook. Similar to like labor, we have a pocket guide, mapping a pocket guide, so sourcing a pocket guide. And those pocket guides are really designed to make this approachable in terms of what is the issue, how would you step into it? What are some of the key questions you might want to be asking? And how would you begin to think about potentially making a commitment to one of these issues on your own? And then we have a number of one-pagers that talk about the different tools and resources and reports that are already available to you as you begin to think about these. And then for the sourcing and even for the renovation work, there are some case studies about how different partners in the challenge, even beyond the challenge, are working to implement some of these programs. So just a quick update on each of these networks. I'm not going to go into it very deeply, but just a reminder that if you're interested in participating in these calls, please just reach out to us at scc@conservation.org. We're happy to add you to the call roster and send you the invites to these calls. You can also look for updates on how these networks are progressing in the monthly newsletter that we do send out at the beginning of each month. So for the first one on the coffee farm renovation rehabilitation, some updates here are that we did launch these common metrics that Valerie referred to earlier for reporting on R&R commitments, and those were vetted within the network and agreed upon. Trying to initiate a fund to develop some innovative models for co-financing smallholder renovation rehabilitation in partnership with TechnoServe, and looking for some innovative financial models for what are different ways of enabling smallholders to take on the risk or burden of renovating their farms, not having to suffer through 3 years of lost production with no income from those trees. And so what are ways of doing that kind of smooths out that pain point that farmers might feel and incentivize them to actually do this level of investment on their farms. Also developing some social and environmental safeguards and good practices for R&R. So how do we make sure that as farmers are doing renovation and rehabilitation, they understand the different varietals that are available to them and the pros and cons of those. They understand, shade systems that might be viable for those different programs. They also still adhere to good environmental practices in terms of not clearing additional forest area to replant. So making sure that we are all clear on those practices across the sector. And finally, some exciting work to develop a shade tree catalog for Indonesia. So this is in partnership with Smithsonian Migratory Bird Center and World Coffee Research. So as World Coffee Research pushes out varietal catalogs, we want to make sure that those go hand in hand with some shade tree catalogs that also help farmers understand different options available to them in terms of shade trees that are good for production, good for diversification, good for carbon sequestration, those other types of co-benefits that they could be getting from implementing shade varietals or shade cover on their coffee. So as I mentioned, the R&R metrics, we have spent a bit of time over the past several months or almost a year to develop these R&R metrics and really trying to make sure that we can better understand the reach and impacts of the existing investments, capture some useful data so we understand the implications of R&R both in terms of cost and performance, and also serve as best practice guidance. But really trying not to make these exhaustive. We have more exhaustive lists, but what we've put in the hub is what you see on the right-hand side in terms of countries and regions, making sure that we're tagging those. We understand trees distributed or sold, number of commitments, how much we're investing, how many hectares are impacted, how many farmers are benefiting. And the types of services that are being provided, and looking at survival rates and compliance with these social and environmental safeguards as well. On the labor practices, like I said, a few months ago, Rainforest Alliance began to facilitate these network calls, which we are really, really grateful for. We're always looking for partners who are willing to step up and lend their expertise to advance these particular agendas. And so thanks to McDonald's and their willingness to host a in-person workshop to try and figure out, okay, we're seeing more and more concerns about forced labor issues pop up in Brazil. There was just an article last week in the headlines again about some issues there. And so really trying to figure out how do we collectively respond to those in terms of not just PER responses, but what are we doing to try and address the core issues happening and driving some of these concerns. And so I think Rachel Rigby from Rainforest Alliance did an amazing job of trying to pull together some ideas and working with local actors on the ground to figure out, okay, what is the real need and what could be the benefit of the Sustainable Coffee Challenge partners lending their kind of voice and efforts to improve the situation in Brazil, and then how could we use that as a way to advance the ball and replicate this type of action in more countries. We're also co-financing some work that's being led by the Specialty Coffee Association together with Rainforest Alliance and Solidaridad to understand the relationship between labor and coffee quality. So if we implement good labor practices, what's the relationship between that and specialty coffee? So that's some research that's now getting underway, and we're excited to get that, advanced and get the results and present those out to this particular audience as well. On the scaling up sustainable sourcing, this is one where Fairtrade USA, Parker Townley, is facilitating this network. So we're also very grateful for his leadership on this. This one tends to have a look and feel that's a little bit different from the others, and that we're not trying to get collective investment in sustainable sourcing. We're trying to make sure that different actors are taking on sustainable sourcing commitments as they can, and as they, and to try and get some alignment around and understanding around what those look and feel like. And so a lot of the work on this one is to have guest speakers share their experience in implementing and designing sustainable sourcing programs. We also tend to pull in updates on the price crisis response mechanisms across the sector in this particular network, and have the speakers who are leading those response programs to share what they're learning and some of the research, and try to understand how our partners can leverage that information to better understand the situation in terms of living income for the farmers producing the coffee. And then another thing that we're about to embark on is helping the industry have more of a code of ethics. There's a lot of opportunity around blockchain and how we can better share information from farmers and understand where the coffee comes from, but really trying to also think about what do these digital transparency blockchain programs give back to farmers, and how do they remunerate or provide farmers with any benefit from data sharing, story sharing, those types of things. And so trying to put together a code of ethics or good practice for developing those types of programs. And finally, the Coffee and Forest Mapping and Monitoring Network. Thanks to the support of the Walmart Foundation, we have funding to develop an innovative model for mapping coffee and forests in Colombia and Indonesia. So there's a technical side of this in terms of trying to make sure that we get better at understanding where is the coffee footprint and how is it changing over time. Often we lack that information in the places where coffee is being grown. We can understand suitability for coffee, we understand what the forests are, but we don't always have great maps of where the coffee is and how it relates to those forests, especially if there's shade canopy overhead. It's not something that we can easily detect from remote sensing. So we're trying to get better at that, and there's a 2.5-year scope of work to develop innovative approaches for doing this in these two countries, starting with these two countries and then taking that and working to apply it in more regions. We also have a number of guest speakers to share tools and resources to help identify deforestation hotspots, how other sectors are looking at deforestation related to their commodity, and what can the coffee sector learn from that. We also have great discussions about the opportunity for the coffee sector to commit to carbon positive forest conservation, no deforestation types of initiatives. And so if you're interested in that kind of discussion and debate, we definitely welcome you to that table. And finally, we've been working very hard over the past year, and it might seem slow and plodding, but I think we're making great headway in thinking through what types of information should we be collecting and presenting back out in terms of what countries are doing, and what metrics we should be using to look at how countries are performing against forests and carbon and conservation issues in relationship to coffee. So with that, maybe I'll just continue, Valerie, in terms of the spring events. So there's a number of events that we're going to be at in terms of first of all, the African Fine Coffee Association meeting. That's actually in Mombasa, Kenya. So on February 13th through 19th. So a number of us will be there, and I'm really happy to meet up. So if you're at any of these, we're very happy to meet up in person and not just be so like voices on the other side of a webinar or the other end of a phone. And then in March, we're going to piggyback on the National Coffee Association conference once again to have our all partner meeting. So please save the date for March 3rd and 4th and join us in Austin, Texas for our all partner meeting. There's some great updates in terms of the next 5-year strategy for the Sustainable Coffee Challenge, as well as some thinking on some core metrics that we might want to be proposing, and then also a chance for the various action networks to also meet and discuss their agendas in person. And finally, last but not least, the Specialty Coffee Association Expo that's taking place in Portland, Oregon. So we'll have some sessions there. And I know that the Labor Network in particular wants to meet there And so we'll have some side sessions on at least one side session there on labor in terms of trying to get the partners together. So please save the dates for those, and please join us at the All Partner meeting in particular, because we feel like it's a one time we do ask people to kind of show up and spend a day or at least 2 days with us, to make sure that we continue to be aligned in our direction where we're going. And I think this year in particular is very important, as we have been working quite closely with the advisory council members to think about, as we embark, this is our 2020 will be our 5th year of the Sustainable Coffee Challenge. And so we originally had a 5-year plan. And so now we've been working quite hard to put the next 5-year plan together and really try to think about how do we, since the industry has changed a lot since we first started, what's the niche and role that we can really continue to play while we continue things like the Commitments Hub, the sustainability framework. We feel like there may be a need to kind of prioritize some more of our efforts on climate change and some other key issues. So that's all coming soon and to be announced. And we also will be doing a webinar in late January to present some of our initial thinking on that 5-year strategy. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Valerie and see if there's any questions from the participants in this webinar.
Thank you, Bambi. I would just like to encourage everyone to use the chat box or the raise your hand function in the GoToWebinar. But I'm not seeing questions right now, so I'll just give it a minute, and if not, we can wrap up. Okay, well, I'm not seeing questions right now, but I don't know, Bambi, if you wanted to just say one last thing.
No, just thank you for joining us today. And we did record the session, so we'll be posting that on the sec@conservation.org website. And if you're if any of this caught your attention, or you have questions or want to learn more about the work that we're doing, please feel free to reach out to us at sec@conservation.org, and we'll definitely get back to you. But thank you for joining us today.